following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
I am back, and you are flying high with me, the Zigzag Man, over the zone in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco in the northern part of what I consider to be the greatest state in the Union. I'm going to have some arguments tonight because two of my guests, one is from Connecticut and one is from New York, where I started out. I'd like to introduce the Connecticut boy, my godfather, Tony D'Angelo.
And good evening, Zig, and good evening, Alan, and good evening, everyone.
All right, and Alan is Alan Blumkin.
Good evening, everybody.
How are you?
Okay.
Of course, it's evening where we are, Zig.
Yes, it is good evening. It's early evening where I am, 3-hour time difference. And Tony is going to introduce us to a guest tonight who has never been on these airwaves, and he's about to call in. His name is Arnie Wexler.
I'm on.
You are on, Arnie. You are the Gambling Anonymous maven, and Tony told me about you yesterday. He hoped that you would come on, and you did. Nice to meet you. I'd like you to meet Al Blumkin.
Hi, Arnie.
Hi.
One of the podcasters on our network, and, of course, Tony, you know.
Yes, I do.
I didn't have a chance to listen to your interview with Tony, but I want to cut to what really stuck out when I saw your intro. You have what I call the inside skimmy, if you will, to Pete Rose. And it's Hall of Fame balloting time. Naturally, he is disqualified from being on that. Can you give us some update on what his situation is as literally the poster boy for degenerate gambler?
Well, I can't tell you what he's doing right now. I know that he supposedly sells autographs in Las Vegas and uses that money for gambling from what I hear. But I can't tell you that I've seen it myself.
Okay. What is your inside skimmy on Mr. Rose that you want us to know about?
Well, he's definitely a compulsive gambler. There's no question about that. And it would be wonderful if he got into recovery and stopped the gambling nonsense and got himself a healthy lifestyle going on. And, you know, it's a shame that he's not in the Hall of Fame because he's a gambler. Well, they have alcoholics and drug addicts in there pretty much. And you got other Major League Baseball players who have a gambling addiction, and nobody does anything about it or cares about it. There's a guy that played for the Philadelphia Phillies who's a compulsive gambler who had some problems in California, which you know about, I would guess. And you got a situation
I don't. I'm not privy to that. And I think the point of your program is that it's anonymous. I really don't even want to know about who has these problems. I just want to know about, in this case, can Pete Rose be helped? Do you think you've had years of experience in this? You're a counselor, you're a speaker, you go speak at universities, you are very, very big in the Gambling Anonymous program.
Well, it's not, I don't speak for Gamblers Anonymous. I just speak for compulsive gambling issues.
Oh, okay. Let's speak to the compulsive gambling issue.
Well, you know, everything you know and read about Pete Rose, he definitely is a compulsive gambler. And I know for a fact that he attended a couple of meetings in Cincinnati when this whole thing broke years and years ago. But that's about all he did, really, to get himself okay. His attitude is he's not really a compulsive gambler. But if you know anything about gambling addiction, you surely know that he's got all the signs that represent he does have a problem.
Okay. Pretty common knowledge.
Absolutely.
What is it that you would tell him that might get.
I would tell him, Pete, if you want to get in the Hall of Fame, you got to stop the gambling and get into recovery, and down the road, maybe they'll decide to let you get in. But it really is, it's heartbreaking to me that a guy like that's not in the Hall of Fame because of a gambling addiction, when you have other addictions and addicted people in the Hall of Fame that have done probably worse things than him or similar things to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Al Blumkin, what say you?
Well, I think, Pete Rosen is now 76 years old. So it's very hard to get a leopard of that age to change his spots. But
I wouldn't say that because I've seen people come for help at 80, 85, and 90. So
you're better attuned to that than I am. I quit. Basically, I quit 1983 was the last year that I did this seriously.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And
what would you tell somebody, Mr. Wexler, what would you tell a young person who thinks he or she may be on the verge of having some of these problems? How can they
first
help
of all,
them?
we have a book out called All Bets Are Off, and I'm getting emails and calls from all over the world. So I would suggest that they go read the book. A lot of these young people are now getting addicted to the fantasy sports stuff that's going on and the internet gambling. Just a few weeks ago, I met with 4 guys between the ages of 17 and 22 who had a gambling problem. And it's not going to get any better. I started gambling at 7 or 8 years old. So anybody who has this bug or thinks they have the bug, get some help because it's not going to get better down the road. It's only going to get worse.
Traditionally, we hear that one has to reach bottom before they can start coming up. I thought Pete Rose.
Yes, but here's the real problem. With drugs and alcohol, you can see it, you can smell it. There's track marks, there's dilated pupils. With gambling, you could be wearing a suit and a tie, and you could be going to work, or you could be a baseball player. There's no telltale signs until the explosion happens.
Okay. If one thinks the explosion is imminent, what should they do at this point?
I would say call Gamblers Anonymous hotline, or I'd be happy to talk to anybody. They can get me on the website. If you punch in Arnie Wexler, ARNIEWEXLER, if you punch it in on Google or if you punch it in on YouTube, you'll see my stuff and you'll be able to be in contact with me. I'll guide you and help you try to get some help for the gambling addiction.
Beautiful. Arnie, you mentioned you had these tendencies when you were 7 years old.
Well, I was 7 years old. I was a kid in Brooklyn, and I was flipping baseball cards, shooting marbles, pitching pennies, and playing pinball machines. At age 14, I was already going to racetracks. And Memorial Day 1951, I was 14 years old, and I turned around. I was making 50 cents an hour after school. I won $54, and I believe that's the day that changed my life. I thought to myself, wow, what an easy way to make money. What a jerk I was to make 50 cents an hour. And I decided that I was going to be a millionaire by age 30. By age 30, I was totally destroyed.
Can you tell us the day that you decided that it had you by the balls and you needed help?
It's very interesting what happened. In February, a guy came to work. I was supervising 400 people. I was working for the biggest dress company in America, and I was the plant manager. And I was stealing from the company every day to support my gambling addiction and doing all kinds of illegal stuff, including having bookmakers and Sherlocks give money to people in my factory, and I would get a kickback. So I was not living a real wonderful life, but I was doing anything to keep my gambling going. I needed to gamble like any drug addict needed to put the needle in their arm. So a guy came to work in my place, and I owed 3 years' annual salary. And I befriended the guy, and I heard he was a millionaire, and I thought that this guy was going to pay off my gambling debts. At that point, I owed 32 different people money, including banks and finance companies. And he told me there was a place, a 12-step program in New York where you can get help. And then he said the magic word. He said they straighten out money problems. Well, I didn't know that they give a budget and show you how to straighten out your money. I thought that meant that they were going to pay off my gambling debts. Mm-hmm. So I went to the program not believing that I was going to stop or I wanted to stop. And on April 10th, 1968, I placed my last bet. And that last bet was had something to do with your territory over there. It was the New York Mets playing the San Francisco Giants. It was April 10th, 1968. I believe it was opening day. And Tom Seaver was pitching for the Mets and Juan Marichal for the Giants. And my Mets were winning 4-1 in the bottom, 4-2, I believe, in the bottom of the ninth inning. And the Giants came up with 3 runs and beat me, and that burst my bubble. That was the last bet I ever made.
All right. Did you ever make a bet that you could stop gambling? Never mind.
No, I never made a bet that I was going to stop gambling because I never had intention to or wanted to or believe I could.
Okay. Well, let me tell you something about that 68, those two teams in 68 and in, the Mets and the Giants. I was a Giant fan growing up in New York. The Mets come along. Soon after they come along, I go to California to live the rest of my life. But, wow. So I was always torn between those two teams. It's interesting that they played such a big role in your life. Now, when you decided not to gamble...
I have the scorecard hanging up right on my wall. So I remember it.
Very nice. Hal Lanier was probably playing shortstop for the Giants, if I'm not mistaken.
Shortstop that day was Oliver.
Nate Oliver.
Okay. One of the players came from the Dodgers, as a matter. Pee Wee Oliver came from the. I think he might have.
Wait. 2 guys played shortstop that. Oliver played and Lanier played.
Oh, okay. Lanier did get to play. That's great.
It looks like something must have happened with Oliver because he only got up 1 time and Lanier got up 2 times.
You know, I'll tell you something we have in common, Arnie, because when I was a kid, I would flip baseball cards. And it was only till I'd lose. I'd always lose. And I realized that I'm not a good gambler. I also had this habit as a kid, being a smart ass, going, you want to bet? Whatever, if I had a difference in opinion, you want to bet? I knew that wasn't going to
be. Sure, everybody did that.
Yeah. But the cards, I was a compulsive loser. I don't think there's a problem with gambling when you're winning on the upswing. But, you know, I'm a scientist in the way that you could break down the odds and the probabilities of anything, and the bookie always gets the vig. And if you look at it that way rationally, you might say, well, you know, I'm just not going to gamble.
Ralph, I have a very close friend who was
working for a bookmaker, and I would have 30, 40, 50 customers gamble with my bookmaker. Hello?
Wow.
Yeah, no, we're all here.
We're here.
I had 40, 50, 60 customers gambling with my bookmaker every week, and I would go in there, and 49 out of 50 would lose. And the bookmaker was making maybe $3,000, $4,000 a week like that, and I was getting 20% of the money. And when it came the end of the week, my bets covered more of the losses that I had, so I ended up owing the bookmaker money even though I was making money from all the other people. And a lot of times I couldn't even cover my gambling debt with the bookmaker.
Well, and I'm sure like with any other business, it's a business at that point. You wake up and you have to reprocess the whole thing when you wake up. Who do I owe? Where's the money going to go? What do I have to cover today? Where do I have to race the bank to this and that? It's not a good way to go around the track, and you knew that.
You have no idea what kind of pressure that's about.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's the same as any other business that's failing. And I don't think you can avoid the pitfalls of playing the odds. That's just my my look at it, and I've seen people get help.
I'll share a funny story with you. I'm driving home from work one night, and it's about 6:30 at night, and the bookmaker sheet listed all the ball games for the day and the times they started. And this game was supposed to start 8 o'clock, and it started 6 o'clock. So I'm driving home, and the team is winning 7-0. So I right away stop my car on the Cross Bronx Expressway, go to a phone booth, no cell phones in those days, and I call the bookmaker, and I bet a big amount of money on this game because I'm winning 7-0, and he takes the bet because his listing shows it's an 8 o'clock game. And would you believe I lost the game?
Clear.
Past posting. I did that a few times in college.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Al Blumkin, you were going to tell a story a second ago.
Yeah, I have a close friend of mine who is a retired teacher, and he's a professional gambler. I talked to him yesterday. He's on a cruise. He called me yesterday, and I told him about this upcoming show, and I would have invited him to participate. He gambles casino. He's down in Atlantic City most of the time during the weekends, and he gambles on sports. But he basically expects ups and downs. So he never gets too far off the getting crazy when he wins or getting crazy when he loses. So if he loses, he has a bad weekend, he accepts it and goes on. But he files his income tax now as a professional gambler. So we discussed the point spreads, because I look at the point spreads, the odds on games, the over-unders on games, but I don't bet anymore. Once in a great while, I can pick out a game that I call a fish line, where it looks too easy on the face of it. And that to me is a danger, because if it looks too easy, they're not in the business of giving anything away.
No, they're not.
There was a basketball game last week between the Celtics at Miami. The Celtics had won 16 games in a row. They were in Miami, and the line was 1 point. Celtics were 1. I said, why are they 1? And I told somebody because they're going to lose this game, and they did. Once in a while I can pick that up. You can't do that on a consistent basis. But I don't have the time or desire anymore.
Every now and again, it's been all these years that you haven't gambled.
Yeah, well, sure. The game that broke me was a Monday night game between the football game in 1983 between the Raiders and the Dolphins, and I had a big bet on under, total points under, and there were three touchdowns were scored in the last 7 minutes to make it an over, and I decided after that this wasn't for me. And outside of a trip to Las Vegas I made in 1995 and lost a series of bets because a guy on the Steelers couldn't catch a ball in the end zone that my grandmother could have caught. I haven't, I'll bet lunches or dollars or stuff like that. But no, I haven't seriously bet since 1983. The temptation is there quite often.
You know what? I'd like to talk to you about your friend who, quote, is a professional gambler. All the professional gamblers I know are the states who run the lottery and the casino owners. But I've met over the years people that claim to be professional gamblers.
That's why he files his taxes at.
They're in recovery.
He files his taxes as professional. He saves every receipt because he's got to offset a whole bunch of stuff. And look,
the wins with the losses. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm 74 years old, and I'm at the point where I don't try to talk anybody out of anything anymore because it's pointless.
You're 100% right. I've dealt with a bunch of these guys over the years that thought they were compulsive professional gamblers.
So if he wants to do that and he's not hurting, worrying where the next month's rent or utilities bills or food bills are coming from, then I have no problem with it. But you get to the point where that becomes an issue, then you really got a very serious problem. I used to go to the racetrack. I used to go to the flats and the harness. The harness I used to go with because it was night. And but I never did a get even special, which is what we call the buses that went between the flats in the afternoon to the trials at night. But there were plenty of people that did.
For a lot of years.
Yeah.
Well, when I was growing up, Aqueduct was the big thing. I lived in Queens, and everybody would go out to Aqueduct.
Now go to Yonkers or Roosevelt, because it was night.
Right.
It didn't interfere with work or school or whatever. So.
I had the same experience, and I was an opening day of Monticello Racetrack.
Oh, I hated that place. I never went a dime up there.
And I gambling in the old Jamaica.
Racing today run on the up and up?
No, harness racing, I couldn't. I used to know all the harness drivers and horses. Now I couldn't tell you the name of one driver or one harness horse that's in training. I still follow the flats. And I still think the good stakes races are on the up and up. The claimers and the cheap races, I'm not so sure about.
Okay.
Well, I can tell you one thing. I get a guy comes into my factory one time and he wants to sell me boxes. And I tell him I got to get 10% cash back on any boxes that I order because it was a big dress company. We shipped a lot of items. And the guy says to me, well, I can't give you any cash, but I go to Roosevelt Raceway and I bet for one of the drivers and I can get you great information. Well, to me, that was more important than cash. So I started going with him. And he was an ex-baseball player, a good baseball player, a long-time baseball player. And he played for the New York Giants. Mm-hmm. And he was retired. And you know the guy if I mention his name, but I won't. And I get to the Roosevelt Raceway, and the guy comes over every night with an envelope with cash in it, and he tells him what to bet on for him. And this guy gives us the information, and we're betting. And at that time, I was a 2-win, 2-place, 2-show better. And after 4 weeks, I got $4,000 in the bank. And we're talking mid-60s when you're making $50, $60 a week.
Yeah.
And for a month this goes on, and one day a guy comes over to me and he says, hey, if you give me the information that the driver gives you, I will give you some money. I never knew the guy was a driver until the guy questioned me on that.
Oh, wow.
And the guy was a big name driver. And he brought in a horse called Meadowlands, and Meadowlands won from the 8-hole and then won from the 6 or 7-hole. And the next thing that happened, it was a Saturday night, and the horse ran into 1 pole, and he finished out of the money. And they threw that guy out of the racetrack, and he opened up his own racetrack in Pennsylvania about a year later.
Once in a great while, I was able to catch something. It was the Yonkers one night with a friend of mine, and the race in Carmine Abatello has a horse that was out, had always shipped in the week before and ran 7th. So it's running against the same field the next week, basically. And all of a sudden, I turned to my friend and says, why is this horse only 11-1? After he came in 7th, so absolutely nothing the week before. So we feel, we were $2 bettors. We threw, I think, $5 a piece on it. It won. It paid $25.70. Won for fun. And there were very, very few $2 bettors cashing on that horse.
Well, I used to get all the fixed races in Monticello Racetrack.
Oh, yeah.
But I remember one time I won $412 double. I had 6 tickets. And by the time I went home, I was borrowing money to bet the 8th race.
Yeah, I had guys like Eddie Cobb and Willie Ryan. I mean, these guys were all, horse race is easy. All you have to do is yank on the bridle a little bit, and you can throw the horse off.
I have a question to you guys. Some people bet the umpire in baseball.
There's been studies. A bunch of years ago, some guy came out with a study on batting averages by umpire. And there was a discrepancy of about 25, 30 points between the high end and the low end. The umpire union went crazy when he published this stuff. But I think now it's, now with the way data can be compiled now. It's probably readily available.
I don't remember the guy's name, but there was an umpire.
I watch a lot of baseball, and I don't know how they can possibly compile data on these umpires who are so inconsistent from inning to inning, from team to team.
But the strikes, generally it's a strike zone. You got umpires that favor pitchers, umpires that favor hitters, and they're known.
Right.
Well, I could tell you a couple of years ago an article came out about a guy that was an umpire that was bookmaking bets with the baseball players. He was the bookmaker for the baseball players. I believe it was a National League umpire. And Mindy Rudolph, who was a referee in the NBA,
I remember,
known for years that he's had a gambling problem, or he had a gambling problem. He used to go
there
down.
was the case recently of the NBA ref who was literally caught. It wasn't rumor. He was caught shaving points or whatever.
Yeah, Donahue, or whatever his name was. Yeah.
Tony, you're in the thick of things
But you
back
talk
there.
about Tim Donahue. I was in court with Tim Donahue when he got sentenced.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I know Tim very well. I still speak to him.
Okay. As a counselor, no doubt.
Well, I tried to get him help early on, and he went for help early on, but the last thing I know, he's running some kind of, he sells information on who to bet on.
Oh, great.
Like Brent Musburger, right?
There's another one.
Went to the tip sheet business.
Yeah. I mean, I was the guy that brought Chet Forte into recovery also. And Art Schlichter at one time. Although Art Schlichter's back in jail again.
Chet Forte lived an amazing life. He was a guard at Columbia back in the very early 50s. He basically was responsible for Monday Night Football. Am I correct?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
Absolutely.
Tony, talk about it a little bit.
Well, you know, Chet told me a story a couple of times about he's doing Monday Night Football, and he's the producer or director, I think he was. And he's got this bet going on, and he's listening and watching some game that he has a bet on, and he missed call a play for them to show on the TV because he was listening to a game he had a bet on.
Whoa. That's interesting.
One of the great...
Angelo,
yeah.
Do you have any insight as to what was going on back then with Monday Night Football?
Other than the fact I was a rabid fan, no. I'm just marveling at these stories. And I mean, I think what I'd like to ask Arnie is, when we spoke the other night, it was a question that our time did not permit. We started to talk about, and I asked Arnie, are gamblers, problem gamblers born or made? And I'd like Arnie to answer that for all of us. But I'm as a, whatever you want to call it, as a good former Catholic kid, my father was a church raffle addict, and I'm still waiting for that 66 Buick to show up in my driveway. One of these days I'm going to buy one out of spite. But I guess my question to Arnie is, someone like that, if I were to take my...
for one, is it too late for that, Tony?
I'm sorry?
Can you pray for one, or is it...
Well, the question I want to ask Arnie is, if my dad were around today with all of the gambling venues, I mean, I live in a casino state, there's lotteries all over the place, would he have generated into a problem gambler? Did he have the indications?
I don't know. You know, Tony, it's Tony, right?
Yes.
You're the only history can tell you that. But there's been a lot of research in the last few years that show that there's a defective gene in the brain of a compulsive gambler. And that's where the problem starts. So I have to believe, answering your question, that you're born with it.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I've been to racetracks with a lot of people over the years when I was gambling, and they'd make a bet and they'd not make a bet and they'd sit down and they'd take money home. I was never like that. There were many nights I walked out of the racetrack broke. I mean, with nothing. Or I try to have control, so I would leave money in the car. And then by the third race, I'm running back to the car to get money. And then by the seventh race, I'm running back to the car to get more money. I never could have any control. And every once in a while, I would stop and bet less money than I was betting, trying to get control. And then a week later, I'm back where I was or deeper.
How different is that than compulsive eating or compulsive smoking? Is it one big defective gene, or, you know?
Here's the real difference. When somebody's an overeater, you see it. When somebody's a drinker or a drug addict, you see it, you smell it, but compulsive gambling is invisible. You know, you got a lot of athletes have it. You got a lot of professional people that have it. You got big-time lawyers. I've dealt with them. I've dealt with almost every kind of person you could believe. Here's the classic case. A woman comes in one day and calls me. I was running the council on compulsive gambling then. And she calls me on the phone and she says, I need help. My husband's a compulsive gambler. I said, tell me a little bit what's going on. Married 33 years, she tells me. I didn't know he was a gambler until he got arrested last week by the FBI because he stole $60,000 from an insurance company that he worked for. Now, that couldn't go on with alcohol or drugs without a family member knowing or seeing. And the same thing with food. You know, you can't have somebody who's very overweight tell you they don't have a food addiction because you could see it. But compulsive gambling is hidden and invisible. No track marks, no dilated pupil.
Thing because they won last week and they're not winning this week, they'll win next week, that kind of thing. I'm sure that's...
Well, I always believed that even if I was broke, the next $25 I could beg, borrow, or steal, I'm going to turn into a winning streak. Absolutely.
Do folks that go to Gambling Anonymous that have trouble with a higher power, does that disqualify them from the program or from getting anything out of the program? If there are people
I can't speak for Gamblers Anonymous, but I could tell you that my grandmother sent me to a rabbi when I was 8 years old to learn about my bar mitzvah. And I was giving the rabbi $8 a week. I would go to him 4 times a week, Monday to Thursday. And somewhere where I was about 10 years old, I figured out if I didn't go see the rabbi and study for my bar mitzvah, then I could take the $8 and use it for gambling. And by the time it came to do my bar mitzvah, I wasn't able to do it because I never learned it.
I got sent to Hebrew school 4 days a week for 5 years, and I hated almost every minute of it.
My father was an atheist, and we were sent to Yiddish school, which was Yiddish and to learn culture.
Well, one of the reasons I got into it because I knew my parents would disapprove. Besides the excitement I was betting, you know, the first bet I ever made was $1 on the 1953 World Series, and I won it. I had the Yankees against the Dodgers, and then I started betting quarters, you know. And I turned down when fantasy baseball started. I turned down so many offers you won't believe. I just couldn't deal with it anymore. But basically, it was because I knew my parents would disapprove of it, and you know, people. I'm second generation American. People, friends of mine that I know, also had the problem to some extent because it was something that the parents couldn't control. It was a rebellion in a small sense.
I've gotten calls from priests and rabbis that I got into recovery over the years.
That's very interesting.
So it was a rebellion against structure.
With foibles, so it shouldn't be that surprising. If, you know, Matt Lauer, Garrison Keillor today, it's a crazy world with all kinds of mishigas going on, craziness, for your benefit, Tony, and some of the audience. What would our grandparents or parents, if they were alive, what would they think of it if they came back? What would they think of the state of the world? It's unbelievable.
You know, next week the Supreme Court is going to rule. I think it's next week. The Supreme Court is going to rule on sports betting in the Atlantic City casinos.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's very interesting.
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up, Zig, because and I was mentioning this to Arnie. I mean, in Stamford, Connecticut in the 60s and 70s, I mean, all of the betting was football slips or, if you really wanted to get down and dirty, and I'm not gonna, I don't say this in pejorative or derogatory terms. I knew of a particular barber shop by a theater where my father worked where you could go in daily. This is pre-state lottery and play what was known as the N-word number. And that's, I guess the states got wise to that and saw the cash stream and quote unquote legitimized it. And, Arnie was talking about how people can become, state lottery addicts for crying out loud.
Well, it's immoral. It's immoral and illegal unless the state gets its cut.
Well, the lottery came out in 1967, and I was still gambling, and I was spending $300-400 a week on lottery.
Wow.
If the state gets its cut, it's wonderful. That's the government, no government attitude towards it.
Well, I'll tell you this, when they put lottery in California, they said that the schools were the ones to benefit.
Same in New York.
It's not happening. It's not happening. Schools aren't benefiting from it, and that in itself is a ripoff. But as we find, the unholy trinity, big business, government, and the church, they all conspire to get us one way or the other. We're a doomed society, the way I look at it now.
Ralph, you brought up the Monday Night Football, and the early years had two of the funniest moments. Early in the first year, the Rams were playing a home game against San Francisco, and Bob Hope was the halftime guest. So Cosell asks him, how do you like the game so far? Bob Hope said the Rams better get moving. I gave 12.5 with them tonight.
Well, it's funny. I did Howard Cosell's show. He used to have a show called Sports Beat, and I did his show, and he was absolutely understanding about this addiction.
Yeah, there's also a time when they're doing a Oakland-Houston game in Houston when Oakland was slaughtering them, and Cosell says, asked Meredith, why are they staying around here? And says, this game is over. And then somebody scored a touchdown, and Meredith turned to Howard and said, now it's over. They covered the over in the point spread.
It's interesting because if I recall right, Musburger was doing the game one time, and all of a sudden he yelled out they covered the spread.
Oh, wow. That should have gotten them fired.
Didn't that also get Al DeRogatis fired at one point from NBC because he was talking about covering?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. But tell us about Howard, Arnie. I didn't realize that he interviewed you.
Howard, I was brought on to do Sports Beat, and I did the interview, and David Stern was on the same show, and the Kentucky coach at that time was on the show, Kentucky college basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And Stern said, we don't want any gambling on our games. We don't think it's right. And now the NBA is supporting sports betting.
Well, all the leagues have interest in FanDuel and the other one, DraftKings.
Absolutely.
They support all that.
Yeah. As you say, Alan, it's tax. So
ego, not money. You're lost. It doesn't matter the money if there is money or no money. I play fantasy baseball, and I play it for no money at all. Yet when my pitcher gets schlonged in the first inning, 7 runs are scored in the third of an inning, and I know it's going to screw me up for 6 weeks, I get that same feeling as if money were involved. So I don't think it's a money thing.
It's ego.
It's an ego thing.
It's ego. To show that you're right and you can forecast these things better than anybody else.
Well,
better than the people you're competing with.
When the psychiatrist who was treating Art Schliester asked me to come and help him, Art shared a story with me about he would have a bet on the game. He would call a play when he was playing in Ohio State and in Baltimore when the Colts were in Baltimore. He was still the quarterback. And he would call a play, and then all of a sudden he's thinking about his bet, and he gets to the huddle, and he forgot the play that he called.
Wow.
That's compulsive gambling. I had a baseball player call me one time that owed $800,000 to the Trump Casino in Atlantic City. And, owed $200,000. And he was making $800,000 a year. He couldn't pay $10 to the casino. He was so broke. And he was a Major League Baseball player. He was a catcher for the Houston Astros.
Yeah, I know that, there were show business people like, Jackie Gleason, Phil Silvers, and Walter Matthau, to name three, were compulsive gamblers. Chico Marx was a compulsive gambler. Groucho once said about him, he liked fast women and slow horses.
I once got a call from a relative of Walter Matthau. I believe it was a niece, and she was trying to get him some help.
Yeah, but the show business people, the stars like that, they had money to burn, so it was, I guess it meant nothing to them to go to a casino and drop $50,000 or whatever a night. Yeah.
You got a few of them in Hollywood right now that are in deep shit because of compulsive gambling.
Okay. Tell us about your program, Mr. Wexler. You go to different colleges and speak?
Wherever they ask me to come and speak, I speak. I spoke in Kentucky. Newton was the, the director, the athletic director. He brought me in to speak one time. But I've spoken in probably 24 colleges. I spoke in Rutgers one year, and a couple of guys on the team that I spoke at that year are today in recovery from gambling.
And gentlemen, I'm going to have to leave. I'm sorry it's not an emergency, but there's something I have to deal with at home. So I'm going to bid you all a very good evening. And Arnie, thanks for coming on Comfortably Zoned. And I will, I'll be coming to you guys tomorrow. Okay. Thanks. Take care.
Tony, thanks for being here. Anytime, you're always welcome.
Thanks very much.
You've done.
Love you guys. Bye.
Uncle had a big business in Stamford, Connecticut.
Yeah, it's a big business all over at this point. What with the Internet, you mentioned Internet gambling. How prevalent is that becoming?
It's an explosion today for these young kids. We got a ton of people calling hotlines and asking for help because they're gambling on the Internet.
Okay.
And it's funny because in 1991, they decided to put all gambling on the computer illegal, Internet gambling and what have you. And the only thing they left out, somebody somehow snuck in that fantasy sports was exempt from that bill and that law in 1991, which is crazy.
Right. Would you tell people again how they can get in touch with you, buy your book, your website, and a phone number?
Sure. You can see my website at www.A for Arnold, S for Sheila, Wexler, Wexler, .com, I'm sorry. Or you can email me as aswexler@AOL.com, and you can get our book. It's called All Bets Are Off.
Okay, tell me about, you mentioned Sheila. I'm assuming that's your wife.
Correct.
Did you get into the program together? Did you meet in the program?
It's interesting you asked that question. Our first date was to the movies. The second date was to Monticello Racetrack. Sheila was 17 years old. I was 22 years old.
Wow.
And I took her to the racetrack, and the guy at the door, and she was wearing pigtails, and the guy at the door said, "You're too young, you can't come in." So my first thought was I was going to leave her in the car, and I would go in and gamble I think there were 8 races in those days.
You rolled the windows down a little bit, huh? What a guy.
But the bottom line, I was not going to leave Monticello Racetrack because I had a girl on a date. But we went into another window, and the guy let us in. And the next maybe 50 dates that we had were Las Vegas nights, a sporting event that I had a bet on, or a racetrack. And then we got married. And I wanted to go, of course, to Las Vegas for our honeymoon. And the travel agent, my wife said, no, we're not going to Las Vegas. She understood I had a problem before I had an understanding of it. And then the second choice was Puerto Rico. I knew there were 2 casinos in Puerto Rico, and she said, we're not going there because the travel agent said there's casinos there. So we went to Bermuda. And an interesting thing happened. We got down to Bermuda, and the first day I see a jar of jelly beans, and it said, if you can guess how many jelly beans are in the jar, you can win a free trip to New York. Well, we had a ticket to New York. But the first 3 or 4 days of my honeymoon, I spent more time with the jelly bean jar than with Sheila.
Oh, wow.
Indeed.
And that's how it started. And then 7 years we went along with this kind of stuff. Every Saturday night I would come home, and Sheila would say, what are we going to do tonight? I said, we're going to go to the racetrack. They have a nice dinner there. We're going to have dinner in Roosevelt or Yonkers, and we'll have a nice night. And that's how we spent our whole life, gambling, until it really became a disaster and I had to stop.
I was able to come back, guys, so I'm here.
Oh, Tony D'Angelo, the prodigal son.
Prodigal returns. Prodigal returns.
Interesting story, Mr. Wexler. Anything you guys want to ask our guest, Arnie Wexler?
Yeah, the one comment I'd like to make is that ESPN and the NFL Network and probably a few others promote fantasy leagues. They fantasy sports. They have ESPN does an hour show on Sundays with this guy Matthew Berry, and all they talk about is fantasy. The NFL Network does a show on Sundays from 12 to 1 before the Sunday games start, and all they deal is fantasy. The whole thing is just totally insane. And one time when
baseball,
owner of
the Dallas Cowboys own a piece of the fantasy leagues.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and when I was getting invited to play fantasy, I told one friend of mine, I said, I got better things to do than care about who the 26th man on the San Diego Padres is, just in case one of my players gets injured. I just couldn't deal with it. You know, I got to a point psychologically where I couldn't deal with it anymore.
Look, the whole thing.
I may get to that point
really
someday, Al, but I find it great fun, and I don't play for money.
Yeah,
and
that's the whole thing.
An interesting thing. New York State decided they were not going to let fantasy gambling come into existence in New York State. So they had the Attorney General block it, and there was a big commotion. All of a sudden, the fantasy sports people are giving them 14.5% part of the money, 14.5%. Now
directly
it's
to
leased
the
to
Attorney General?
New York.
Directly to the state.
Who are they giving this kickback to?
To the state.
State Revenue Department.
Oh, okay.
So now the state has become
taxes,
legal in the state.
It's like legalization of weed out in California.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's immoral unless the state gets its cut.
Just show us the money.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What's very interesting now that it's becoming legal, folks are paying taxes that go into the police department that used to bust people for the same exact thing that they're doing now. Al's right. It's all a matter of money. Morality changes, views change based on money. City coffers, this, that, and the other thing. What a society! What a society! Tony, any questions that you might want to ask Arnie Wexler?
You know the national.
Arnie, yeah. One thing is you get more customers who are horse bettors or sports bettors.
I didn't hear the question.
More horse bettors or sports bettors, or is it pretty much the same?
The horse industry is dead today. Even with all the races, once they put casinos all over this country, the horse racing industry went dead. And you could see today so many casinos, so many slot machines are being opened in racetracks today because of that. Mm-hmm. And the racetracks are bringing in money from the slot machines, not from the horse racing. If you took the slots away, the horse racing industry would be down the tubes. Totally.
You know, while we got you, Arnie, we might as well talk boxing.
Well, I don't know much about boxing, that I could tell you.
Can you tell me what's legit, what isn't?
I have no idea about boxing at all.
Yeah. Well,
I know a couple of boxers over the years that I heard were compulsive gamblers.
well, no names necessary.
I don't even remember who they were, but over the years, there's been boxers that won big money in the last few years and then go into the casino and blow hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Entertainers as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I've dealt with a bunch of those, too.
Yeah.
How about
satisfying work, Arnie? You must sleep well. You're helping people.
Well, the only way people stay in recovery is to do what I'm doing. The people that help other people stay in recovery, the people that don't fade away. And nobody comes back later on in better shape. I mean, you got a couple of real good baseball players who've been addicted gamblers over the years. And Rose played with two of them, in fact.
Really? Geez, I don't even know whether or not it's, should I care? Does it matter? If you want to tell me who those two are, you can. If you don't.
Well, Lenny Dykstra is one of them.
Okay.
It's been known for years that Lenny has there's been stories about Lenny and
McClain.
Actually. They got a night game, and in the afternoon they're in Atlantic City gambling.
Denny McClain was another one who supposedly had trouble with that.
Absolutely. No question about it.
Right. Now, I think some of the smartest people, your mind is turning all the time. You get people that are very, very smart, and they're humbled by all of it. That's a bad
I have never met a stupid compulsive gambler.
Pardon me?
I've never met a stupid compulsive gambler.
Okay. My instincts are good there, yes.
They always have pretty high IQs, and they're bright people, and they're people that can turn nothing into something and make a good life. And, you know, we got a guy right now that Craig Carton was a big radio guy down here in New York, up in New York, and he's in trouble with compulsive gambling today.
Yeah, lost his job and losing his home, and it's not good.
Involved in a Ponzi scheme, also.
Right, and how much of that is gambling?
No, look at Bernie Madoff. Look at how many people he suckered in.
How many owners are involved? That's what in horse racing and in gambling, and that's what really makes it scary because they're doling out the bucks in the first place. So
gambling today is running rampant. I believe that gambling might even be stronger today than addiction to alcohol.
Well, that's I don't know. A lot of people drink. A lot of people have vices.
Well, there's a lot of people that gamble too, but not everybody that gambles is a compulsive gambler.
Now, there's one guy I used to hang around with years ago. The Sunday games, and this was before Monday Night Football. The Sunday games would be over at 7 o'clock. Right away, he would call me up and said, "This is what the line should be for next week's games."
Sure.
You mentioned that not everybody that gambles is a compulsive gambler. Do compulsive gamblers in recovery dream about gambling without being compulsive? And can that be done?
It takes a lot of years. It probably took me 10 years to get rid of the gambling bug and not think that next week I'm going to be able to make a bet or down the road I'm going to be okay to gamble. This thing is so inherent in your body that it's just incredible. Nobody understands that.
You can't go back. It's like smoking, I guess. You can't go back halfway or...
you can't be half pregnant.
Right.
You're either a compulsive gambler in recovery or you're not. And nobody gets cured from this addiction. I know a guy after 38 years, in recovery, went back to gambling because he went to a Final Four one day, and he said his dream was always to bet on the Final Four. And in the last 5 years, he's lost 3 houses, 2 cars, and he was living in a rental apartment, and he, quote, became a professional poker player in the poker tournaments. And he borrowed $10,000. 6 months ago, he borrowed $10,000 from his son and blew it in the first round. So, nobody gets cured from this thing.
Yeah. Sounds like there's a lot of sad stories. That's basically it. And it sounds like you're preventing people from sad stories and happy endings, which is what it's about.
We're trying to carry the message. That's all we can really do.
Beautiful. Thank you for being here, Arnie.
Thank you, Arnie. This was very educational.
Thank you, Arnie, and thanks, fellas.
Pleasure to be with all of you guys, anytime.
Beautiful. We'll hold you to that because there's a lot of folks on this station, sports people, with curiosity. And we'd like you to keep coming back to some of our shows. Arnie.
Yeah, if Arnie comes back, I'd like to bring
give me a holler.
My friend in who's a professional gambler.
Hey, Arnie, let me say this. Why don't, if you say that to be true, you come back next week on Tuesday night, same time if you can.
I can't come back on Tuesday because Tuesday I go to a 12-step meeting.
Oh, okay. We have a show that you might be interested in. It's called Vintage Sports from the Old Garden at Nedick's. And we got a bunch of we old-timers talking as if we were standing out in front of Nedick's. And you'd fit right in. You'd have
how I remember that. The first time I went to Madison Square Garden, my uncle was involved with bookmakers and stuff, and he told me a certain player playing for the Syracuse Nationals, I think it was. He said this game is going to be dumped, and sure was, and I had a $5 or $6 bet on the game. So a lot of stuff over the years. I spent a lot of time in the old Madison Square Garden as a kid.
I know Alan is going, who was that on the Nats? If I throw out some names, would you know who they were?
Sure.
Al Bianchi?
Nope.
Okay. Dolph Shays?
No. Never Dolph Shays.
No.
Paul Seymour, Al Servey, George
Yardley played for them for a while.
No, George Yardley was later.
How about
Larry
Ostercoin?
Johnny Carr. No, it's hard to pick. It might be somebody who had a very short career.
Right.
You mentioned the name.
I did mention the name?
Yep.
We mentioned it, in other words.
Yep.
So this I have to admit I'm curious about, and if it's Dolph Shays, I don't want to know. Let's put it that way. You laughed suspiciously.
Oh, I did,
Okay, let's just leave it hanging.
Actually, I lived in Queens, and he lived around the corner from. His parents lived around the corner from me.
Oh, really? What part of Queens did you live in? I lived in Jackson.
I lived at one time at 164th Street on right off the Long Island Expressway.
Fresh Meadows. I lived there for 10 years, yeah. I lived there for 10 years.
Yeah. You know where Alexis
You're in Belrose, if I'm not mistaken now.
I was Belrose as a kid, but my parents sold the house. We moved to Fresh Meadows. I was there for 10 years before I moved out on my own.
I lived in Bayside also for a while after we got married.
Yeah. My brother lived in Bayside for several years.
Tony wasn't allowed to live in New York. He had to live in Connecticut.
Oh boy, that's another story. That's probably worthy of its own show, for crying out loud. My father in the theatrical unions in New York, but that has very little to do with sports, or a different kind of sport.
Here's a funny story. When he called me to do the show, and he said he's out of Stamford, Connecticut, my uncle had a very big business there years and years ago when nobody was living in Stamford.
That's right.
I mean, really nobody was there. It was like farmland.
It was.
Turns out that he's
Jackson
friendly
Heights
with
with golf courses. in the very early 50s or late 40s and what have you. So
when I was growing up, no kid was born on Long Island and Queens. They were all born in the Bronx like me or in Brooklyn.
Right. Well, how about this? I was born in New York and lived in Queens, but my grandparents were in the Bronx, cousins and relatives in Brooklyn, friends in Staten Island. You're in New York. You're multicultural.
Yeah.
It could be any borough you'd adjust. In Brooklyn.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll get Al's opinion. Was there much difference between Queens and Brooklyn?
I didn't grow up in Brooklyn. I didn't live in Brooklyn until about 30 years ago. No, I was in the Bronx, and basically Queens was more open. I was in one of the blocks in the Bronx they had all these high-rise 6-story apartment buildings next to each other. There was no room for anything.
Well, that's how it was in Jackson Heights.
This was in the Parkchester Avenue section of the Bronx, and then Queens Melrose Queens was open spaces. It's a whole different world.
I was born in Brooklyn. My grandmother had a 4-story brick house, brownstone house, and she sold it after the war for $7,000. Today they're going for $1.5 million.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like my grandfather's house on Hall Street. Yeah, it's $10,000 in 1976. You need a telephone number today to pay for it. Yeah,
we were on Stockton Street.
Hey, nice reminiscing with you guys. This has been a terrific show, and I hope we can do it again real soon, Arnie.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Give me a call when you want to set up something.
Okay.
Beautiful, I will.
Take care, guys. Good to
Every
be with
night
you.
but Tuesday.
Good night, everybody. It's been fun.
Okay, take care.
Thank you again. If you're listening out there and you really enjoy any of our offerings, I implore you to accumulate lightly used children's books, put them in a carton, take them down to the Head Start program in your community, and start getting kids reading, getting them prepared for school, and doing well. Be well, everybody. Thank you again for listening. We're over and out. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Adios.